예, 안녕하십니까. 방금 마이크 넘겨받은 이가민입니다. 이번 세션이 제가 한 3시 40분 정도까지 시간이 있습니다. 그래서 저는 제가 이제 프로페서 베킷이 강의하는 동안 가지고 있었던 몇 가지 질문을 하고 그 다음에 여러분들이 질문사항이 있으면 질문을 받고 이런 식으로 40분까지 진행을 하도록 하겠습니다. So, Professor Beckett, welcome to Korea.
Thank you very much.
So you just come to the right season of the year. The beautiful autumn in Korea is very short. I hope you fully enjoy the autumn.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning. It's absolutely beautiful.
Okay, very nice. So during your talk, this very impressive talk, you talk about this the results of the global survey of journalism and AI, and then key risks and opportunities for this AI for news media. But while I was hearing your talk, I kept thinking about the fundamental issues such as the definition of news in the age of AI. Because nowadays, we talk a lot about fake news. But at the same time, if you think about this journalism education for the last 30 years, when I first learned the news and news value, maybe some definition of news by like a shoemaker 30 years ago, news is news because it provides a lot of these survival advantages to us so that it can survey the outside world, it can kind of provide a possible threat to our survival. That way it can increase our survival rate. So even though we talk a lot about this kind of a definition of news a long time ago, but nowadays with this AI, we have more discussion about fake news. We have a lot of this citation about fake news, information, disinformation, misinformation. But surprisingly, there are not that many talks about the exact definition of news. So maybe in this symposium, maybe you can share your insight about the real definition of news, especially in the age of AI.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think that, I mean, it was easy in the past. When I was a journalist, the definition, the person who defined what news was me. The journalist decided. We said, that's news, and that isn't news, you know. And obviously, so the power shift is not just about AI, it's about social media, and it's fundamentally that we are now aware that what people are interested in. And it turns out that people are interested in a lot of different things that we weren't aware of. And that the way that people think about information is, again, quite different. We used to have this idea that everyone was perfectly rational, you know? That if you gave people the facts, then they would judge things in a kind of scientific way. And I don't think that was ever true, but it was quite useful for us as journalists, you know, to pretend that the world was a rational place, because we like to think of ourselves as rational. And I think one of the things that's been exposed is that people are much more emotional, and they think in terms of their identity and their values and their beliefs. I mean, in Seoul today, you know, we've got the demonstrations going on because people disagree, you know? People disagree, and in a way that's healthy. So when we talk about disinformation, I think we have to, it's not clear-cut. It's not that you can say this is definitely untrue, because there's actually a kind of spectrum of what is true and not true, what is debatable, what is arguable. And there are different kinds of disinformation. There are people who do it by mistake, including journalists. You know, sometimes we say things that aren't true by mistake. And then at the other end, there are people who do it deliberately because they want to make money from fake news, or because they want to have a political impact, you know. So I think it's very difficult. We're not going to go back. There's no way we can go back. And in that sense, I think AI yes, it can make it more complicated, but it can also help. One of the interesting things, for example, around the conflict that is currently happening in Gaza and Israel, there's been a lot of disinformation, you know, videos which are not true, mainly. But none of them, or very few of them, are AI generated. It's just old-fashioned people lying, people saying that this imagery is something that it's not. So in that sense, the AI is not the problem. The problem is the people.
Oh, okay. So can I understand it in a way that, so we have no problem understanding that disinformation or information, they are not news. We think that news are based on fact. And also we think that news is based on this, like a professional judgment by journalists. So as Koreans, all of us remember that at 9 o'clock, we used to watch 9 o'clock TV news because we believe that the news media at 9 o'clock, either KBS or MBC, we believe that they judge something and we are there to listen to what they think about the current social issue because, in a sense, we believe in the journalist. And then in America, like a long time ago, at 6:30 p.m., many people watch Cronkite news show because they believe that Cronkite is delivering the fact, delivering the right information. But the age of AI, because of this misinformation and disinformation, and because it's so easy to generate news, as an audience, we are kind of confused what kind of news we should trust. So in a sense, we are, even though this is the age of journalism, that journalism is as good as our curiosity, not like journalism as good as the journalist, but it's journalism as good as our curiosity. So if we just look into more, if we investigate more, we can know the truth. But at the same time, because we are busy, we really want to know, we really want to have a good professional journalist, like a good medical doctors taking care of our health. We really want to have a good journalist provide the truth to us. So from that perspective, in the age of AI, is there any code of ethics? Is there any kind of professional education? Or is there any like a professional guideline from news agency so that the news agency can generate better journalists in the age of AI?
The short answer is no. Firstly, I think we have to understand that people are more suspicious about anybody in authority now. And there's a good reason for that. People have just been through a massive financial crisis, 10 years ago. People were told everything was going to be great, and then there was a financial crisis. People have just been through a massive pandemic, where hundreds of thousands of people had their freedom restricted, and many people lost their lives. So I can understand why people may not automatically trust people in authority, I think, and that's got nothing to do with technology. But the other part of it, I think, is around social media and around even, with AI, where people can find things out for themselves and they can even create content themselves. I think on balance that's a good thing. You certainly can't reverse that process. People like to do it. People enjoy being able to communicate for themselves. All the evidence, that's why social media is so popular. People like to be able to have those conversations. They don't want to have the dialogue controlled by journalists or by politicians. So what do journalists do in these circumstances? Well, as I've said, use AI to make your journalism more effective. But there are ways that you can behave that will help have a relationship of confidence with the public. Things like being honest about what you do and don't know as a journalist. When you make a mistake as a journalist, admit the mistake and correct it. But also, why not share? We're all trying to find things out. The journalists are trying to find things out, the public are. I think we should be much more, share that experience much more, have more of a conversation. And yes, you can have codes, you can have an AI charter, you can have guidelines, you can make sure that you tell your readers how you made the journalism. Did you use AI to make the journalism, for example? Those are all good things, but in the end, the people will trust you, and people will have confidence in your journalism, and they will continue to pay attention to you if you have a relationship over time. There's no magic to it. There's no magical formula. There's no gadget that can say, I'm telling the truth, please believe me. It's a relationship over time. And we've seen, for example, during the pandemic, that the public did turn back to mainstream journalists because they wanted more reliable sources of information. So I think, and I'm encouraged by, as I said, the relative sustainability of legacy media. It's still there. People have to make decisions in their lives. Which school they send their kids to, whether they invest in something, and they need good information to do that.
Okay, so this is my last question. It's going to be a very short question. So during the talk, you talk about this using AI to increase the efficiency in journalism. So, and then as a part of the solution, you talk about humans in the loop, right? So even though it's AI, humans should be there in the loop. But actually my background is human-computer interaction. So I designed the Samsung Smart TV, I designed all kinds of ICT devices. From this IT perspective, we always think about, when we think about technology, we think about full automation, no humans in the loop. So I just it's a thought experiment. So what about a situation that you create this AI journalist with some kind of a code of ethics built into it, so that the AI journalist can generate news, but at the same time, because it has kind of built-in algorithm, it can create news with professional ethics behind. Then in that case, do you still think that humans in the loop is necessary?
That's a brilliant scenario. I love the idea of it. And I think what you have to remember that a lot of journalism is actually quite robotic. If you've ever worked in a newsroom, quite a lot of the tasks are quite basic. It's a question of taking a complicated story and making it simple, and we have a formula to do that. When we train journalists, we say, think of the who, what, why, where, when, for example. So you can kind of program a human. You train a human in the same way that you're quite right, you can train an algorithm. And if you can build in ethical safeguards and so on. Here's the problem though. In the real world, you're constantly having to make adjustments in terms of your judgment about a story, but also about the values involved. Is this the right way to tell it? Is this the whole truth? And I cannot imagine a fully algorithmed robot being able to do that. I mean, you know this, don't you? That in practice, these tools are always much more limited than you think. Okay. Yes. I hope so anyway.
Okay, so now let's open it to the public. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Any questions from the floor? Okay, so do we have mic? Okay, please.
네, 감사합니다. 포커스 데일리 최동혁 부장인데요. AI 챗 GPT가 1년 동안에 오면서 우리는 그 사용하는 툴에 있어서 언론인으로서 생각을 해보면 첫 번째는 프롬프트 엔지니어의 우리가 질문을 던졌을 때 대답을 해주는 것이지 그 친구가 먼저 우리한테 질문하는 건 절대로 아니거든요. 질문자가 질문하는 방향에 따라서 그 친구는 대답을 자동적으로 하게끔 돼 있기 때문에 그것은 우리의 생각을 의외로 그 친구에게 강요하는 것이 아닌가. 이제 그런 부분에 대해서 우리가 고민을 해봐야 된다 생각합니다. 아까 우리 이관민 관장님 말씀하신 것처럼 실질적으로 윤리 문제는 기계가 윤리에 대한 개념을 갖는다고 하더라도 그 준칙을 준다고 하더라도 걔가 이해도가 없을 것이고 거기에 뭐 신경망이 있는 건 아니잖아요. 그래서 제가 볼 때는 질문자의 그 기본적인 인격이라든지 이런 부분에서 우리가 언론으로서의 자격을 갖추는 트레이닝이 더 필요하다고 저는 생각합니다. 그것이 우리의 주관적인 상황이 돼야 될 것 같고 그들은 우리가 활용하는 도구일 뿐이지 그것이 인간이 될 수는 없다는 저의 생각이거든요. 그 점에 대해서 교수님 어떻게 생각하십니까?
Please.
I agree with everything you said. I think you're right. I think it's we're all learning. People who are using ChatGPT, for example, we're learning the craft of the prompt. You know, it's a skill. If you ask a stupid question, you'll get a stupid answer. You know, and it's usually you shouldn't just ask one question. It's usually a series of questions, and we're all experimenting with what happens and how we can make it more useful and more effective and so on. And I think that's always been a traditional journalistic value, which is asking the right question and knowing what the right question to ask is has always been a key journalism skill. And I think it's exactly the same with ChatGPT. If you ask the machine a stupid thing, you ask it to do something really difficult, it's going to struggle. So ask a different question. So I agree with you. Yeah.
좋은 질문 감사드립니다. 다음 퀘션 한 두 분 정도 더 받을 수 있을 것 같습니다.
Thank you very much, Professor Beckett. I was impressed by your speech and especially by your accent. Because I lived in London and Newcastle for 2 years when I was much younger, in 1990s. By the way, before the presidential election, if somebody makes AI news, which is fake news, it will affect the election, right? So we can imagine that just before, one day before the election, someone makes that kind of news, then do you have to admit that the result of the election, that kind of problem will caused by the AI news. In terms of that, we have to make that kind of regulation or some kind of rule by ourselves as a journalist, I think. So is there that kind of something going on in Britain in terms of journalism academy or journalists? That is my question.
Yeah, elections are interesting. As I mentioned with the Israel-Gaza situation, most of the disinformation that's happening has got nothing to do with generative AI. And I think that, funnily enough, because there's been so much publicity around fake news and so much publicity around the potential dangers of generative AI, is that I hope anyway that people in general and journalists in particular are more aware of this. One of the biggest dangers will be if journalists themselves are influenced by disinformation, you know. And I think it is a serious, it's a serious problem because, as I said earlier, it might not just be one big lie. It might be just that, for example, our friends in China might decide to swamp the internet with millions of messages advocating one thing or another, and that will have a detrimental effect because it will muddy the waters and people won't know what to believe. I think that's the bigger threat. It's less dramatic, but I think that's the thing that worries me most.
So now we have time for one last question. Any last question, please?
네. 좋은 강의 잘 들었습니다. 저는 그 대한언론인의 사무총장을 지낸 류종현 박사입니다. 우리 지금 AI와 언론의 혁신 중에 제가 관심 있는 분야는 카피라이트입니다. 이 카피라이트 AI가 생성한 요즘에 모창, 그러니까 보이스도 목소리 또는 얼굴 어떤 형상까지를 거의 똑같이 이렇게 리프린트 해내는 그런 능력을 갖고 있는데요. 자, 그렇다면 앞으로 AI 시대의 방송과 저작권, 방송 저작권 또는 언론 저작권의 큰 문제가 지금 야기되고 있습니다. 뭐 복제권, 전송권 등 많은 분야에 큰 문제가 야기되고 있는데 우리 교수님께서는 과연 이 시대, AI 시대에 저작권에 있어서 가장 큰 문제는 무엇인지 그 부분에 대해서 좀 실증적 예를 가지고 좀 설명해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Yeah, I think the problem with copyright is a massive problem, and a lot of lawyers are going to get very rich trying to sort it out. You're probably aware that there are already existing cases ongoing where, for example, organisations are taking the tech companies to court because their material were used to train these large language models, and that's going to be really interesting to see what happens with that. One of the fundamental problems with this is that these large language models are trained on other people's material, but they don't use other people's material when they create something. They don't take a bit of this picture and a bit of that picture. They invent something that's completely new. And so that raises a really difficult copyright problem about how you assign ownership over that thing. And at the moment, the tech companies have solved that problem. If you look at their terms and conditions, they're very, 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 very long, and they basically say it's got nothing to do with me. They're basically saying if anything happens, it's all your responsibility as the user. And I think in a way that's quite a realistic situation. I think that for journalists, for the news industry, when I'm thinking about imagery in particular, I think this is quite simple. You don't use generative AI to create images if you then pretend it's a real picture. The whole point of journalism is that it's supposed to show you reality. So if you start doing that, then you might as well close down your business. When people see a photo on a news website and it says this is Gaza, it's got to be Gaza. And luckily, journalists that's our job, is to verify things, to make sure things are accurate and true. So fun enough for the news industry, I think this is going to be, that aspect of it is going to be less of a problem, at least for the good news industries. And just the final thing is, the other thing that's happening at the moment is negotiations between news companies and the tech companies, basically trying to blackmail the tech companies into giving them money, or to negotiate agreements where they allow them to use their content because the news brand will claim that's especially good content that's beneficial to the tech company and the large language model. So it's all happening. It's all very new.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Professor Beckett, for sharing your afternoon with us. Thank you very much.